Hey folks, Larry here again with Curio Mechanics, and in today's video I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of creating your own streaming service. In this day and age, there's a lot of companies that offer the ability to play music or movies from basically without having to download them. They can come directly through your connection in real time, so makes it a little more convenient because there's no big wait up front. But as these services continue to evolve, they're all subscription based and do cost money. So I have in my own house set up the ability to serve my own files. I use it primarily for audio, but video does work as well. You could do pictures and even files. So let's give a little thought to what it took to accomplish this. First of all, you want some kind of a machine that you're okay with leaving on all the time. Now for me, I bought a old HP workstation, a 680 was the model number. But really any machine that you can leave on, a laptop works just fine and will take a whole lot less power. In this day and age, the single board computers like Raspberry Pis are great choices. But be aware that the larger your collection becomes, the longer it takes for it to iterate through that and serve it. So even looking at a list of my music files took a while when I was running it on a Raspberry Pi. So that's why I wound up upgrading to a twin Xeon server with only 32 megs or gigs of RAM rather. It doesn't take a lot of memory, but you do want a relatively decent machine if you want an instant experience. So, but like I say, for starting off, a simple laptop will do. Anything with enough storage to consider it a bucket. And if you are using a single board computer or a mini computer, depending on the integrated storage, you might want to move over to like a USB SSD. Now in my case, what I created was an external RAID that is then connected to that computer. And RAID is just basically a bunch of disks that work together to either preserve your data in case of a failure or offer better performance. And I won't get too deep into the weeds to that, but I use a RAID 5, which means there are 4 disks and they keep track of each other. And I have the capacity of 3 of those 4. So in my case, I used 8 terabyte drives. So that would be a total of 32, but it actually makes 24 visible and usable. So with overhead and file structure, it's about 21 terabytes of usable space. And so far I haven't outgrown that, and should give me a decent amount of reliability. And the performance on it's fine. It's USB connection, so it's not amazing, but it does the job. But just think about what kind of storage you want and what buckets you're going to put everything into. Now for operating systems, it's pretty much your flavor of choice. This does work on Windows, Mac, or Linux. For me, I've always been one to prefer Linux for server operations especially. And I would recommend that if you're going to do what I did and expose it to the outside world so you can get to it from outside your house, Linux is also going to be a more secure system. I have the least amount of experience with Macintosh. Mac rather, but it is based on FreeBSD, which is also a Unix variant, so it should be relatively secure, but I just don't have enough first-hand information to talk you through it. So we're going to pretend that we're working on a Linux server. Now for me, the first step was just to create, like I said, a file or a storage place. So I mounted my external RAID and gave it a location, a folder. The next step was that I went and got Apache server, which is free, and that acts as a web server. So what that let me do was basically manually send the files to it, but then I could use any web browser really fairly low spec. It doesn't matter how old the browser is. For this particular system, it doesn't require a lot of horsepower. So I put Apache server on there, and then of course in the configuration you can determine what folder it's serving from. So I pointed that to the mounting point that I had decided to use for my RAID. So now you've got the ability to see those files remotely. And believe it or not, most browsers do a real good job of actually being able to stream directly from that setup. For MP3s, I basically just click on it. It opened a little play window in the browser and handled that file like it was a normal stream. So life was good. And for movies, I had the same luck. MP4s, MKVs came right through. Now, some file types like FLAC or WAVs, it had to download it. And, it was good, but that wasn't what I was looking for from outside, because I don't have the world's greatest upload by any stretch. I live out in the Tules. So it was limiting for, I like a lot of my music in WAV files and high density files to boot. So FLAC and WAV, that was a little bit troublesome, but it got me started. So just simply creating a bucket and pointing Apache to it, finding that web address inside my house was a piece of cake. Now, I've mentioned hooking it to the outside world. We'll talk a little bit about how I accomplished that. Now, for a lot of people, you can purchase what's called the static IP address through your internet provider, which means that you have a fixed point in internet space that you can get to. So it's not a moving target, and once you know that number, you can use it pretty much worldwide to connect to it. But being the cheapskate geek weirdo I am, I decided I was just going to use what's by default a dynamic IP address, meaning that every so often my router actually switches it to a new address. Well, I use a dynamic DNS client to go out and then tell an outside server where that address has moved to. In my case, I update it every 30 minutes. But it just looks at who you are and sends that information to allow you to connect to that moving target using a fixed URL. The service that I use is DuckDNS, DuckDNS.org, and it seems to be fine. When I first set it up, I got some security warnings, and the general feedback was that, oh my goodness, but frankly, it's worked fine for years, and I have no complaints whatsoever. But I'll let you just pick your favorite flavor. But be aware that if you do want to see it from the outside world, like I said, you got to think about the mechanism to actually find your server. So whether you use a dynamic client or choose to go with a static IP, that is a personal choice. But for me, I've had no problems using a dynamic client. Now, I mentioned I do that every half hour. The dynamic client does not do that itself. What I do is actually run a cron job, CRON, which is nothing more than a Unix mechanism to run anything on a fixed schedule. So you pick the time and you tell it what to do, and I literally just wrote a one-liner script with what I need to do to go and refresh that remote information. So there's a little bit of setup, but I'm really not even going to get too deep into it because it boils down to which one you choose, and there are several. So just be aware that you have to probably mechanically tell it to update periodically, or do it before you leave the house. I mean, really, if you know you're going to be using it for a while, my address does not change all that often, so you probably could go on a nice vacation and still not have to worry about it moving from under you. But like I say, you basically need to find that server. The other step that's going to be necessary is to forward the port you're using to your server from your router. Port forwarding is a very common feature found in routers, but unfortunately, again, each one's just a little bit different. For me, I go into just firewall, port forwarding, tell it what port and what internal IP address I want it to point to. And what that basically does is anytime somebody from the outside world tries to open that particular port on my router, it knows that I want to talk to that specific machine by IP address. And if you're really creative and elaborate, you can actually set up multiple IP addresses on the same machine, have Apache only listen to the one you want it to respond to, and you can get fairly tricky with it. But for me, it was just a matter of pointing, and web service is always going to be port 80 by default. You can make it any port you want, but you will then have to include that port when you enter the URL from a remote location. And simpler devices like Android phones and whatnot, it's just a nuisance. So I left it on the default port 80, so I don't have to add that port to get it to bounce somewhere else. I do have several other services running on oddball ports just to keep the bad people from finding the easy way in, but they're still there. But like I say, your router is what's going to control the port forwarding. Now I will add here that I do use a hardware firewall, so I feel like I have a little bit extra security. But once you start forwarding ports anywhere for anything, even a game console or your favorite flavor of computer, peer-to-peer application, just be aware you are poking a hole directly from the outside world into your LAN. And most routers from the ISPs these days are pretty good about preventing intrusions, but you want to keep it as secure as you can, and don't just open every port under the sun because you think it's fun. Know a little bit about what you're getting into. Now, for me, again, using Apache, which is it's very mature and robust. There are, again, other choices. The one I would probably be the most skeptical of is on Windows. Internet Information Services, IIS, has been built in there since NT, and it works, but I haven't used it since the NT days. But back then, it was just frankly, it was pretty bad for security. So I would step up to something a little more robust and probably a little more trusted. So now you've got your connection from the outside world. You've got it able to talk to your server, and your server knows what to do with it. So for the simplest setup, there you go. Now, I thought that was cool, but I have a Blu-ray player that can stream music. I have now a nice Cambridge audio network player, a DAP, digital audio player, and so I wanted to go to the next level. So then I set up what's called DLNA, Digital Living Network Alliance. And it's an older protocol, but it's used on top of TCP/IP, actually UPnP, but it will allow those more, I don't want to call them primitive because they're actually full-blown computers, but more primitive devices to see and access that. And especially when you don't have a console, obviously a Blu-ray player, you're just, you got up, down, and okay, basically. So, but then that advertises itself. Now, I did not forward the DLNA port to the outside world, and we'll get to that in a second. But internally, anything I hook up, I can see it. Like I say, it's a pretty common standard, and it actually works very well for streaming and locating media. So that's the next step. For me on Linux, it was just a matter of setting up a daemon. DAEMON is the name given to any generic service that's just kind of waiting in the background for something to do. And the one I used originally was called Mini DLNA, and it worked fine mostly. But then when I got the new DAP, the Cambridge, it was having a harder time seeing it. and it seemed a little flaky. So then I went and started digging and found a much more robust system. What I settled on, it's a little bit older, but it seems to actually work beautifully. And the security of it is still going to be based on the underlying mechanism. So I didn't feel like I was opening too many back doors. But it was called Serviio, is how I'll pronounce it, but it's Serviio. And it was a paid product, but I want to say it was like $25. It wasn't a huge deal. So, and I'm sure at this point in time, 10 years plus after it was released, the developer was probably surprised to get a cup of coffee from somebody. But in any case, I set up Serviio. And that allows me to use pretty much anything to connect to it. It's, again, got a very robust interface. It serves the album artwork. It monitors the the storage area. So it continues to process those files to make them streaming friendly. So for me, that was the final piece of the puzzle, was adding Serviio. And like I say, I've been very, very happy with it. And it seems to work well. And they even have an Android app, and so you can get to it from your phone. Like I said, the digital audio player had no problem with it. There is a web interface, so anything with a browser, you can pull up a nice list of all your files and movies and sort them by album title, genre, all the usual happy stuff, and it puts in the album artwork. So it looks really good and it works really good. So that was, for me, the last step so far. Now, the other question is, well, where do I get a collection? Most folks wind up kind of doing things that I wouldn't recommend, which is sharing files with friends. And, back up to the old LimeWire days when it was kind of the Wild West of file sharing or peer-to-peer networks. You get what you pay for. And frankly, a lot of the peer-to-peer is a security risk. Again, you're opening a door, and without having any real mechanism to verify what's coming in that door, believe it or not, even a JPEG can contain a hostile payload. So I don't want to scare you, but for me personally, it was a matter of just dutifully collecting all my CDs and tapes and everything I had. Originally, I've always been kind of a fan of physical media. The whole idea that, we'll go there too. With digital streaming services, we'll just pick Spotify out of thin air. They set up a relationship and a contract with a particular label and an artist, and pay them a royalty, or the artist usually pays rather to have their music published. If that relationship changes or breaks, that music is quite often delisted. So, you're having your favorite Bruno Mars or whatever, and all of a sudden, it's not there anymore. You're still paying your subscription, but it's a volatile system. And so I always kind of, I have my favorites, and I like stuff, and some of it's rather old, and a pretty eclectic blend, I'll tell you that much. But irrespective, I wanted to make sure it never went away. So I've always, like I said, tried to collect the physical media where I can. Now, Amazon these days, and actually that's another thing I'll throw out there. One of my favorite websites for music is actually Bandcamp. Bandcamp.com has a lot of independent artists and a lot of people that are working to get their name out there. But for you, the consumer, it's a great marketplace because there's an incredible variety. You can preview any of it before you buy it. The prices are extremely reasonable. In fact, some literally just work off a donation system where you pay what you think it's worth, or, whatever. So Bandcamp has been pretty instrumental, and I've found a lot of stuff I didn't know about. So I've done some wandering, but of course you have to put the work into it. But then when you purchase something, you can download it in a number of different formats. So I usually will get an MP3 copy for, quick and easy access remotely, and then, WAV or lossless FLAC, a high density file for home listening to make them a little more enjoyable. But I've had them for years, and I have access to everything I've ever bought. And the second you click on purchase, you can download it. And so put it in your bucket. Amazon, same way. If you purchase music from them, you have the ability to download it. So the other mechanism, like I said, CDs, tapes, whatnot. For CDs, it's actually really easy. I'm sure we're mostly familiar with ripping it. But in case you're not, most all flavors of, or operating systems rather, offer some kind of a tool to literally copy that audio directly to your computer as a file. And they're pretty good these days. There's not much loss or compression, so the resulting quality is really quite good. Won't bother giving you any names for ones that I use, but there are several for Linux that work very, very well. So just CDs are easy. Put it in, rip it, copy it to your favorite folder. And I'll talk also about that just for the sake of security. I have my, what we'll call my server folder, what's being shared, pretty locked down. I have to go in and use a super user account to even put anything in there. Now, reading, sure, have at it. I don't really care who manages to get into my collection, and that goes for myself because I'm using any number of devices and authentication mechanisms. So, but I would not just share the folder on your network, give everyone access, and call it a day. The general principle of security is minimum required, and so read access is great, but anything writing to it, I would put it in like I say, a more secure container. So it may be a little trouble to get stuff in there. For me, it's pretty straightforward. I just SFTP, and then we'll move it over. Or, if you're creative enough, you can just do remote root access. But that's another vulnerability. But however you do it, just be aware that that bucket you're sharing with the world, you want to make sure is not just open to the world. Professionally, we had a Red Hat server that we used as our, kind of main box, and had all the financial data on it and customer records and whatnot. And one day I was doing some maintenance, and I thought, well, that's weird. The hard drive is full. How did that happen? Because it was way bigger than we needed. And I went digging around and found like 20 gigs of episodes of Friends in French that were being relayed. What? French Friends? Okay, well, great. But you don't belong in our business Red Hat server. And we had a pretty decent firewall. It was running off of FreeBSD, and it was professionally maintained. So they can still find a way. But that's what happens when you leave a bucket and don't put a lid on it. So, but that's kind of the basics. Like I say, it's very straightforward once you figure out the software, and there's always some configuration that you need to do, and most Linux stuff is literally just editing a flat text file and putting in the parameters you want, or turning on and off the features. But they're well documented. The things that I've suggested, especially Apache and Linux itself, you can find a million example files or how-tos, and if you have to phone a friend, there's a good chance that the questions are in a language that's meaningful. It won't say, ABC 123 equals 5. It will say, do you want to share with the public? Access equals yes, that kind of stuff. It's not obscured on purpose. But for security, like I said, use the minimum required. Don't just, it sounds convenient, but that convenience comes at a price. And, so you do get 50 copies of Friends. It's not the end of the world. And if you're doing your routine maintenance, you'll catch it. You'll find that all of a sudden your main server drive, like I said, ballooned for no apparent reason. And if you're running backups, which you definitely should do, you will have a fallback plan. But for the basics, and if you're not sharing it with the outside world, that's a whole different ballgame, because then You obviously are the security mechanism. If somebody's in your house playing with your computer, you've got much bigger problems than your saved copy of Weird Al Yankovic. So I would, you can drop the bar a little bit. But like I said, I wanted to get to mine from anywhere, and I do travel periodically. So it was kind of a nice feature. And obviously, if you've seen the movies and whatnot, you're not going to have an unlimited selection like there are many services that seem to. But that was the trade-off I was willing to make. It's free. It's mine. I got it. But I will circle back. I mentioned CDs. They're real easy. But, a lot of other formats, especially like records or tapes, they're non-digital. So how do you get those into a computer? Well, what I did is I bought a external recorder, a digital recorder, and that's the one I'm recording this on right now. It's a Tascam DR-05X. It's not the most amazing thing. There are very high-end recorders, but it's also not the cheapest thing either. I tried some of those, and some work better than others. But for me personally, this Tascam has proved to be just a great unit and far and away has the capabilities that I need. But essentially, what you want to do is capture it digitally somehow. And most recorders will have an audio input and an output and an SD card. So you just record it, literally plug it into the headphone jack and hit record and hit play, and there you go. Now, if you're going to go to the next step, which is nice, if you just hit play on your tape deck and hit record on your, whatever, you're going to have one long file. And I had that for a long time with recording LPs, is that it just had no way to know where the one song started and ended. And, so it was great, but I hope you wanted to listen to the whole record or at least half of it, because each side would be a file if you paused it when you flipped the record over. But Audacity is a tool that's extremely powerful. There are several pieces of very good software to edit those files. But I would personally recommend you take the extra time, and once you've gotten your file in there somehow, and by the way, Audacity actually has the ability to record. So if you happen to have a line in on your computer, you can just hook that to the headphone jack of your favorite Walkman or whatever your device you're capturing from. I use it for reel-to-reel copies. It makes a very nice recording. But use a program to split them up, label them properly, and store them properly. It's, kind of simple maintenance, but I have a couple terabytes of just audio, and, back in the old days, everything was just in one folder named MP3s. Well, that was fun until it wasn't. And, you're scrolling through 1,000 songs to find something you like. Well, you find you play a lot from the A and Z end of it, and not a lot from the L in the middle. But, be diligent. And Serviio is actually pretty good in that it will try to keep like things together. But I even run an external program now that can get the metadata from the web, embed that, get the album art. So once I've captured something, I tend to run it through that, and I just can't think of the name of it, but there are several that do the job. So you could have it automated, or you can take it, just the simple step of calling it what it is when you save it, put it where it goes. For me, most of my stuff is broken up by artist name, and then album name, and then song name, but whatever logical hierarchy you follow. But I'll say that again, especially if you're using like Apache, where it's just a flat list, you want to keep it organized, because it gets pretty crazy pretty fast. And no fun is no fun. If it's not fun and enjoyable to use, well, I'd say you've kind of defeated your own purpose. So those are the things that I can think of. Start off, get something to share, get a way to share it. Consider poking a hole into the outside world using either a dynamic or static IP, whatever system you want to go with. And once you really like it, take it to the next level and consider sharing it with more primitive devices that can also consume it. So you don't need to have a computer or anything fancy to get to your favorite music. You can dial it up on your TV. And now that more appliances at home are getting smarter, I wouldn't say it'll be very long before we'll have musical toasters. So I see the future being pretty bright for this effort. And it is fun. It's something I would do as a project, and maybe work with, father-son, mother-daughter, father-daughter, mother, whatever. But do it as a team, because you will learn more as you go, and you also better be able to use it if you're the one that set it up. So there are devices that come ready to rock and roll. Network attached storage is the generic term for a device that serves it. And many various operating systems that do nothing but, like MediaVault, OpenNAS, are a couple I can think of. They are really nice turnkey solutions. And if you're just looking for convenience, that's something to think about. But the cost on them, I personally think, is higher than the benefit. What would take you maybe a day or two to set up, they can charge several $100s to kind of do the same thing and leave you with either a subscription to them or tethered to their ecosystem. And I really didn't want either. I wanted a completely operating system agnostic, machine agnostic. It has no idea what it's doing or who it's talking to. It just dumps out the file and you're watching happily in the hotel room. That's, to me, important, but something you need to consider. So before you just fire up Amazon and go look up a NAS, think about what it would take to do it yourself. And if it's, everything I've talked about is free except for the Serviio, which once I tried it out, they do have a free, software. It was more than worth the money I spent. So, but again, we'll touch on this one last time and then I'll let you go. But get something, find a place to put it, find a way to share it, find a way to find it, decide where you want to find it from, and enjoy. So I hope that helps. And thank you, as always, for watching and subscribing. I've been going through some stuff, and so these videos are not as frequent or as in-depth as I'd like, but I need to keep you, at least try to give you something. So this is a subject that I've always been kind of passionate about, and like I say, as a physical media believer, I want to make you aware that there are options besides just paying for something, and there is no permanence in that space unless you yourself are the host. And I'll leave that on a kind of a IT tongue-in-cheek joke that the cloud is just somebody else's computer. That's absolutely true. So make it your own computer, and then you have your own cloud. Thank you very much, and enjoy your day.